So I consider you as my mentor in my life.
So the next time it's going to be very bad in the next 2 or 3 years.
I want to hear your thought about the U.S. presidential election next year.
I would bet against Mr. Trump.
Now, Jim, you have been very positive on China. I was in Shenzhen last week, and perhaps it's been 6 years since I was there last time. I met with some people in the financial industry, and I was positively reminded about the potential of China. Having said that, though, some in the U.S. argue that China could take a military action toward Taiwan, particularly after what happened in Russia, into Ukraine, and the Middle East. I feel these events are giving excuse for China to actually take military action toward Taiwan. So my question to you is, how likely is a military action, in your opinion? And if that happens, will your view on China change?
Well, first of all, if I were China, and I'm not, I would just wait. I mean, look at a map. Taiwan's going to be part of China someday. May have to wait a few years, few decades, but China's been around a long time. So if I were China, I would just wait. Part of the risk is that the American military likes war and is always getting America into a war. So the risk is that America does something to cause a war. There's no way America can win that war. The Pentagon has run war models, and they show we lose. We cannot win a war over Taiwan. So, I mean, it's pretty simple. You look at a map. How could we win? So it will not be good for China, but certainly will not be good for America if a war over Taiwan happens. And it would be a foolish war for both. Doesn't mean it won't happen. What does that do to China? Well, war is not good for anybody, but we've been having wars for thousands of years, and China will recover. China's huge. It's right near Siberia, which has huge amounts of natural resources, not much population, so it's an asset for China eventually. So I would not worry. America in the 20th century had many horrible periods and still became the most successful country in the 20th century. So that will happen to China too. Doesn't change my long-term. My children are still speaking Chinese, but it will not be good for anybody if and when it happens. And history would indicate what happened. I mean, unfortunately, you read you know as much as I do. People are always getting themselves into wars foolishly.
I want to ask you about the relationship between the U.S. and China. While the political relationship between those two countries is at worst, the U.S. cannot cut off their relationship entirely with China. U.S. needs China, China needs U.S. So how do you see the relationship between those two countries, great superpowers in the world, going forward economically, and even if they are at a political standstill?
Well, for 40 years, starting about 1980, both countries did well together. Both countries made a lot of money with each other, and things were great. Politicians throughout history all over the world, when things start going wrong, they blame foreigners. It's easy to blame the foreigners. Different skin, different language, different food, different everything. And so the politicians, Mr. Trump especially, started blaming foreigners for all of his problems. And China's the obvious one. So people started, China didn't hit back as much as they could have. They've been restrained. Now both sides seem to be trying to work together, I hope so. But history would indicate that these two countries will be at war someday. I mean, that's the way history works. When you have a dominant power stagnating and a rising power, they have nearly always clashed throughout history. Not always, but nearly always. They're human beings. That's the way human beings are. So I would suspect that someday there will be a conflict, but shooting conflict between America and China. It will not be good for anybody. Whoever loses will be worse affected. Looking at a map, the Pentagon's war games indicate we would lose, but I don't know what would happen with atomic bombs, but even if we drop an atomic bomb and win, we ain't gonna win.
No.
We'll lose that. That'll be the destruction of us as well. So no, I mean, you're looking at history changing, just as 100 years ago, Britain was the richest, most powerful country in the world, and they went into collapse and were replaced by America. Somebody's going to replace America. I would suspect it's China, but who knows? Maybe it's somebody. I don't see anybody else. It's not Japan who is going to replace America. I don't know who else it could be.
Japan obviously would not benefit from the worsening relationship with all these two countries.
No one has ever benefited from conflict, trade conflict, shooting conflict. Nobody, even the people who think they win, don't win.
Jim, I know you love the stock market or countries that no one cares about. In general, do you think the stock markets in less developed parts of the world look more promising than the developed ones?
Well, they usually do because they're cheaper. You know, if you have looked at Germany 40 years ago, it was very cheap because nobody paid any attention to it, even though Germany was a big and successful and rising country. So if you, I can remember Japan 50 years ago. Oh, you said you're going to invest in Japan, people would laugh and say, oh, you crazy, you know? But it was a spectacular place to invest 50 years ago. So usually, ignored markets are cheap because they're ignored and nobody's paying attention, and that often leads to great opportunities. I can tell you about Uzbekistan right now, where I've started investing a little bit. It's not going to be the new Japan, I don't think. I mean, it could be a great new success.
But they got the undervalued assets in Uzbekistan.
Huge assets, they have natural resources, tourist assets, many, many reasons that Uzbekistan and the people running Uzbekistan now are running the way you would run it, or I would run it. And so it could be a great new success story. But it doesn't have 200 million people, doesn't have the population.
You have said in one of the interviews before, if you could only visit one country in the world, it should be India. That's what you said. But if I'm not mistaken, you are not as excited about India as China when it comes to investment. So if so, why, and what do you need to see to make you interested in investing in Indian stock market?
Yeah, I said if you could visit, I was talking about a tourist as a visiting country.
Yeah.
India is an astonishing place. The food, the man-made sites, the natural, I mean, it's amazing. You know, the women are always winning the beauty contest, you know, lots of really smart people there. But it is one of the worst bureaucracies in the world. They learned bureaucracy from the British, and they took it to a higher level. There are many ethnic groups, religious groups, etc. in India, but there are lots of really smart Indians. Part of the problem is the government, because it has so many ethnic groups and religious, linguistic groups, it's never been able to pull it together, at least not in decades. But I mean, they have lots of things going for them, just no unifying force that I can see yet to make it a great success. They have fabulous farmers, but they have rules and regulations to protect the farmers, which make it impossible. Like any bureaucracy, it ruins the people they're trying to help. So I see great possibilities in India, but you know, China, for better or for worse, has one ethnic group, essentially one ethnic group, which helps, and they have one written language anyway, which makes it somewhat easier to do things. And I don't see anybody competing with China yet as the next great country in the world. India thinks they will be and says they will be. They have very good PR, the Indians, but it's not reality as far as I'm concerned. But if you want to take a tourist trip, go to India. Taj Mahal is one of the most astonishing things. I'd seen many pictures of it, and I still remember the first time I walked in, I said, oh my God, look at this. Hey, no, even though I'd seen lots of pictures, and there are other things like that in India. That's a great place, but
I want to ask you about Africa. You have been to many African countries on motorbike or if you have 20-year investment horizon, would you suggest to our viewers in Japan invest in some of their money in African stock markets?
Well, absolutely, because I mean, Africa has over 50 countries. Some of them are hopeless because of the people, the leaders. Some of them are great, will be great. Africa in history has had some great empires, great success stories in history, and can again. But only if you know what you're doing. If you cannot find Angola on a map, please don't invest in Angola, you know. But if you know what you're doing, there are going to be great opportunities in Africa. There are many smart Africans, they're all hardworking, especially the women. You know, you should find an African woman and invest in her, and you'll get very rich. No, the women really are the hardest working in Africa. Well, that's a crazy generalization, but there are many hard-working women in Africa. So yes, my answer to you is yes. And you should do it soon because the Chinese are swarming all over Africa now. And everywhere you go, you will see Chinese government, Chinese entrepreneurs, Chinese everything.
So what are some of the countries that you like there?
Well, that changes every decade because the people change. But I mean, places like Rwanda, we think that certainly the government has the right attitude towards capitalism and entrepreneurship. That's one opportunity. But it really will depend. Ghana has a lot of cocoa, and if there's a bull market in cocoa, oh, they're rich. You know, in 1956, 57, the richest country in the British Empire, the whole empire, it was everywhere, was Ghana. Because there was a gigantic bull market in cocoa. And they had a lot of cocoa. So they were unbelievably rich. Of course, 10 years later, there was a coup and they were bankrupt, totally bankrupt. So it changes, everything changes. But there are countries that have oil, there are countries that have agriculture, there are countries that have gold. Botswana has lots of diamonds, you know. I remember when I first was motorcycling through Africa, I crossed the Botswana border and I didn't know much about it. I could see something's different now from all these other African countries. I soon figured out it was the largest diamond mine in the world was in Botswana. Of course it's different if you have a large diamond mine. It became very successful. So it depends on the time and what's happening in the world, but it's not the same answer every decade. Africa, life is not that simple.
Now, about Japan.
I love Japan.
We know that. Thank you for that. Do you currently invest in a Japanese stock market?
I have nothing in the Japanese stock market. I sold a week or two ago. I bought ETFs, Japanese ETFs. The Bank of Japan was printing money every day and buying ETFs. Well, they have more money than I do. So if they were buying ETFs, I bought ETFs. I have sold. I wish I hadn't, but I have sold, and it would not surprise me if the Japanese stock market doesn't go back to its old highs, which were 40,000 in 1990. Wouldn't surprise me if Japan stock market didn't do that again, but I've sold.
Related question. You know, Nikkei has started to go higher, and after all those years, in May this year, Nikkei finally crossed over 30,000 yen level and remained above that level at this moment. You know, some financial professionals in Japan are very excited about this and believe this is the beginning of long-awaited change for Nikkei and indication for the changes of Japanese economy, perhaps the beginning of a new bright future of Japan. What are your thoughts about what's happening in Japan, in the stock market?
As I said, it would not surprise me if the Japanese stock market did not go back to its old highs, which were 40,000 in 1990.
What time frame?
The next year or two.
Next year too?
Yeah, not the next, no, it's going to happen. The momentum is there now. The Bank of Japan has got a lot of money and they're spending it. And that usually rising markets bring in investors, bring in foreigners. The foreigners are starting to notice what's happening in Japan. So I would not be surprised at all. I probably should buy it back, but it would not surprise me at all if Japan didn't go to 40,000 again. in the next year or two.
But this will not change your views, long-term views about Japan.
Well, that doesn't change the fact that the population is declining. That doesn't change the fact that the debt is skyrocketing. No. If something changes the population, if something changes the debt, that would make it even better. Oh, then it could be really, really, really exciting, especially if they change the population. Japan has declining population, declining for 13 years. This is a fact. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just telling you facts.
Mm-hmm.
That is not good for Japan, especially with the debt.
So you think stock market go higher short term because it got momentums, but long term,
money printing, buyers, many reasons.
But long term, your view doesn't change about attractiveness of the stock market.
Unless something serious and fundamental happens, it does not change the dire outlook. If I were a 10-year-old Japanese girl, I'd leave, or I'd learn self-defense, because in her lifetime, unless something changes, Japan is not a good place.
Living in Tokyo, I think the city of Tokyo will continue to prosper as urbanization continues, and it's a good city despite the decrease in population of the entire country. But you seem to have a different view. You have said in one of the books, it was August 2020, the total Tokyo's attractiveness will disappear as the Japanese population continue to decrease. Can you please elaborate your thought? City of Tokyo losing its attractiveness.
It's a simple. If the population declines every year, you don't have anybody, and the debt goes up every year. You don't have anybody to pay the debt someday. You don't have workers, enough workers to be competitive with other countries. I mean, if you look at India, China, they have a lot of young workers, cheap, educated, skilled workers. Well, if you don't have those skilled, educated workers to compete, I mean, it's a simple fact. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. Mm-hmm. And so that would indicate that Japan has a dire future and will be. So I would suspect that someday there will be a shooting conflict between America and China. I don't know what you have to do to get people to have babies, but something has to be done or you disappear. Everybody wants to be rich quick. Me too. I want to be rich quick too. But if you want to be successful, do